We have a verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case after all of these weeks. And if you thought that was the only major decision of the day, you would be wrong. We're going to talk about what happened on this absolutely monumental day in court. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. Do you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah. Best restaurants near me. Well, Morgan & Morgan, they're stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So, if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food, forthepeople.com/food, or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. Racketeering conspiracy, not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassie, not guilty. Sex trafficking of Jane, not guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Cassie guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Jane guilty. That was the historic verdict out of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal court today. A split verdict. After almost 13 hours of deliberations and weeks of testimony and evidence and arguments, the 12 jurors acquitted Sean Combs of the more severe charges, the ones that carried the stiffest prison sentence, potentially 15 years to life in prison, but convicted him of the Mann Act charges, which by the way carry up to 10 years in prison each. Although I will tell you in a filing today from the government, it appears the sentencing range they're looking for is 51 to 63 months. So 4 to 5 years. However, there is no mandatory minimum. So would the judge go lower? We'll talk about what the defense is asking for, too. And also, whatever the sentences are, would he combine the sentences consecutively, one after another? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of questions. But I'll tell you what, you would think that the verdict would be just the only big part of today. You would think that's the only major decision. Not the case. Best restaurants near me. Because we got to talk about what happened later on in the day, the bail hearing. Right after the verdict, it was a question of shoulds be granted release while awaiting sentencing, which the judge set today, by the way. Sort of set the sentencing date. I'll talk more about that as well. But I mean, let's talk about Sean Combs. He's been locked up since September 2024. He's been denied bail at each turn. There was a change of circumstances here. He had just been acquitted of 3 of the charges. So, could he make bail? We're going to talk about it. Alright. So, to discuss the hearing and more, let me bring on once again, hopefully not for the last time, but we're at basically the end of this case until sentencing. Joined once again by Long Crimes in Court reporter Elizabeth Milner. Great to see you. First of all, your reaction to the verdict. Is this what you expected? Because let's really briefly explain what happened yesterday that we thought it kind of gave us a preview into what would happen today. Not necessarily. So, yeah, I was not going to lie, Jesse, a little surprised by the verdict in that I really kind of thought there was a really strong case for count 2, that obviously being sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie Ventura. And that was only because of the questions that the jury was asking when they were bringing some notes back. And that was kind of in relation to what had happened at specific instances that the government point out were allegations of sex trafficking. So I thought because of the tone that was inside the courtroom, the way the family was getting a little bit emotional sitting inside the gallery, even Diddy's demeanor for the most part, we've seen him kind of really keep up his spirits. But yesterday was really a time where we kind of saw, I think, the weight weighing in on him that it's possible a conviction on some of the more serious charges were going to happen. And so when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2. But, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered. Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised, not guilty with Jane given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one read back of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony. So, it made me think they might have already been decided there. I was surprised about Cassie Ventura's sex trafficking just because like you said, the read back of that testimony and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So, I thought they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like based on their note there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today and like in an hour they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay. So, we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict? Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquit on all the charges, but I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting. Kind of in the jury box as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end. But in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like given that it comes with a lesser penalty in sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon. And talk about a reaction outside that courthouse. My gosh, what has been going on out there? There's verbal disputes, people spraying things. What is just give us brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict. I witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read and outside. A lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who were kind of with the free Diddy I wouldn't say movement, but I guess they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves, and one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos I think outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some they were a little disappointed with the verdict, but for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot seemed pleased by today's decision. So Elizabeth, let's talk about what happened next, cause right after the verdict, it goes into the idea of can he be released on bail. Okay. And the judge set a hearing for 5 p.m. So later on today, you literally at the time of this recording just got out of there. Remember, let's from a legal point of view, the burden is on the defense to show that Sean Combs is not a danger or won't flee. What was the judge's decision, and why did the judge decide that? Well, given at the top of our show, Jesse, or the top of your show, because it's a sidebar, presented by Law and Crime with the host of Jesse Weber, but given at the top of the show that we didn't announce that Sean Combs walked out of this courthouse, I think it was kind of a little bit of a spoiler for the viewers here that, the judge decided to keep him behind bars until his sentencing hearing. So, I did see kind of a little bit of disappointment from both Sean Combs and his family after, the judge made his decision. And so the judge said that the jury convicted the defendant on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act. He says bail is denied because the government correctly noted that detention is mandatory and it's not appropriate for Sean Combs to be released on bail given the charges that he's still been convicted of. And so the judge says that they disagree with the defense's argument, saying that any felony under 117 and just you probably know that more than me requires detention. And he said even if the defendant is required to not be likely to present a danger to the community. The judge even kind of pointing out just some of what we had heard during the trial where the defense conceded that the defendant Sean Combs was violent. The judge said we own the domestic violence. That was the word that he took from the transcript because Mark had said that in open court. He told the jurors that, and he told them that multiple times, and the judge pointed it out multiple times from the transcript. He says that the defendant's concession as to domestic violence wasn't necessary. He pointed out Mark Agnolo's closing where he says it's horrible for Miss Ventura, what she had gone through, and that domestic violence is the issue. Kind of even pointing to her Instagram statement that she had made after the 2016 video was released on CNN, and again the judge was saying that the video is very much domestic violence. Even kind of pointing to the London hotel incident, saying where Mark Nip-Polo had pointed out that obviously something happened, that he was violent at times, and that conceding the defendant's violence, that he even poses no danger, that he was pointing to violence happened after the HSI raids in March of 2024 because they kind of pointed to what had happened to Jane just a couple months after, and pointing back to the June 2024 incident, which was just a little more than a year ago to this day. And so for those reasons and just some more reasons too, the judge decided that the defendant will remain behind bars pending his sentencing. And yeah, I looked at the government's letter and they talked about violence, they talked about drug use, they talked about the abuse of Cassie, that you have multiple victims in this case, that he used the staff to carry out these transportation to engage in prostitution crimes, that he tried to obstruct justice with respect to these crimes, that under the Bail Reform Act, they argue this was a crime of violence, that he poses a serious risk of flight, a danger to the community. So clearly, it seems that the judge was persuaded by that. The judge did mention something really interesting, because somebody would listen to this and say, oh my gosh, he's going to throw the book at him. He actually said the court takes no position on what it will consider its sentencing, nor what sentence it will impose. However, we kind of got a little bit of a preview of what a potential sentence could be, right? We kind of got an idea of what the defense is advocating and what the government is advocating. Yeah. So, what the defense was kind of advocating for was anywhere between the guidelines of 21 to 27 months behind bars. So, if you think about Sean Combs and his time that he served, he's nearly at a year. So, if the judge were to go for the defense's route, he could be out within a year. Whereas the government was like, okay, no, under the guidelines, it's really 51 to 61 months. So, from the government's point of view, Jesse, it seems like there's kind of a disagreement as to how long the defendant should serve as far as his time goes. But either way, he'll still have time served. And so, depending on whether it's 51 to 61 months or like the defense wants 21 to 27 months, it'll ultimately be up to the judge to make that decision. And didn't the prosecutor say something about a pre-sentencing investigation report? And just to give everybody an idea about what that is, that you got to give the judge as much information as possible before sentencing, and particularly where there's a sentence that's based a lot on the judge's discretion. And that usually consists of, an interview with the defendant, history, background, family, education, employment, criminal history, finances, health, alcohol, drug use. You speak to family members, friends, employers. There's court records that are reviewed, in school records and financial records. They look at the offense as well. They speak to law enforcement of victims. What did the prosecution say about a pre-sentencing report? What anything about that? Yeah, so the prosecution didn't have as long of an argument today, Jesse, as maybe the defense did, but the government kind of pointing back to case law and saying that they're happy to be working with the probation office. The probation office. I will say that there was a part. This was after the judge had initially denied Sean Combs bail and being able to walk out of the courthouse today, and I did see when Moore and Comey was making these arguments on behalf of the government that Justin Combs was kind of sitting inside the gallery really kind of shaking his head. So it seems like from the government's point of view, they just want a little more time to get everything in order in terms of having Sean Combs sit down with somebody, I guess from the probation office, to kind of really do an interview. But the government was like, you know what, the statute is clear. The only thing exceptional about this defendant is his wealth, the violence, and his brazenness. He's an extremely violent person. He showed no remorse. His brazenness is unmatched. He used prostitutes. He assaulted Jane, and it was not self-defense. And then the government said something that I don't even think we heard at trial, Jesse. The government said that he invited Jane to the hotel room where Sean Combs was ultimately arrested, where he had the drugs, where he had the lighting set up. And then the defense was kind of, I think, a little upset by the government's argument there because Mark Agnipolo said, you know what? Listening to Miss Comey makes me appreciate that we have jurors. But either way, at the end of the day, bail is still denied for the defendant. So Sean Combs isn't walking out of that courthouse today. He'll go back to MDC Brooklyn, and then we'll see what happens next at his sentencing hearing or at another hearing prior to that. But then we'll talk about that. Didn't Mark Agno push back a little bit? Didn't he push back on the judge's decision a little bit? He had some things to say. A little bit or a lot of it, Jesse? I think it was more kind of a lot of it. So, during the defense's argument there, Mark Agnolo making these arguments, he said, you know, Your Honor sat through this entire trial. As good as, you know, probations are, you sat through this trial. And they were kind of really pushing for an expedited sentencing hearing. They said that they were willing to waive all those interviews with the probation office and at all the different services that the defendant, I guess, has to go through. They were willing to do all of that. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because Sean Combs has already spent a year behind bars. If he were to have an expedited sentencing, it's more likely that he wouldn't be spending so much time with a year already served. So, I understand why the defense was making that argument. But Mark Agnall also saying that he understands there was a divide between the parties on what to do next. He says other Mann Acts cases are not remotely similar. He said other cases have to do with minors or the defendant is considered to be a pimp and that Sean Combs is entitled to a below-guideline sentence. Mark Nip-Polo saying that the circumstances aren't related to the family. What's different about this case is, and he's kind of citing different cases here, is one pimp who made money off of dealing with prostitutes $1.4 million. He pointed out another specific case where the defendant was with a minor and was out pending sentencing. He pointed to a massage parlor who made $1.4 million too using prostitutes in their own parlor. And then he even pointed out a previous sitting governor of New York who used prostitutes, and he pointed out that he wasn't even charged by STNY. And so the defense really kind of pushed back on the judge's decision, and Mark made a really impassioned argument, but the judge really kind of wasn't budging. I think Mark Agnall thought at one point maybe the judge would budge a little bit or maybe reconsider, but that didn't end up happening. Yeah. Usually in order to get something expedited here, they would say like a delay would result in significant harm or prejudice to the defendant's rights. And I'm sure that's going to be an argument they might make, because when is this expedition hearing? When is this hearing on whether or not to expedite sentencing? And by the way, what is the sentencing date that's currently on the books? Well, the sentencing date currently on the books, and if you guys are Mean Girl fans, you probably know this date. It's October 3rd of this year. And so that was the date that the judge proposed. Now whether or not that date will actually be moved up, that's still kind of a wait and see, because there is a hearing just next week. It'll be next Tuesday. It will be a little bit different than the previous hearings, especially during pretrial, in that it's going to be remote. So unfortunately, Sean Combs will not be present inside that courtroom like we're normally used to seeing him. It's going to be held remotely at 2 p.m. on July 8th, okay? And that'll be interesting to follow. Now, Elizabeth, going back to something, when the verdict came down, a lot of reaction. I talked about the people outside, but there was reaction. There were statements from the government, right? There was a statement from the, Department of Justice, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. There was reaction from Cassie Ventura's lawyer. And also, speaking of Cassie's lawyer, when it came to submitting letters to the judge today, right, there were people who submitted letters to the judge regarding the bail and that there was a concern if Sean Combs would be released. What can you tell us about the letters that people submitted in the wake of this verdict? Well, two of the letters that we know of is one from Cassie Ventura through her attorney, Doug Wigger, which I'm going to read in part. Jesse says, "We write as counsel for Cassie v. for Cassandra Ventura to respectfully request that the courts deny Mr. Combs to be released pending his sentencing on his 2 convictions." And then they kind of talk about under what particular statute it is and all of that. And then kind of towards the end of this particular message, Doug Wigger wrote, "Detention is mandatory post-conviction on these charges. And Miss Ventura believes that Mr. Combs is likely to pose a danger to the victims who's testified in this case, including herself as well as to the community." But Jesse, like I just mentioned, that wasn't the only person who submitted a letter to the judge. Deontay Nash, who testified during this trial, also submitted a letter to the judge. I'm not going to read the full letter, but it says in part, "I am writing to express my grave concern over the prospect of Sean Combs being released from custody. While I appreciate the fairness you have shown throughout this proceeding, I feel compelled to be unequivocal about the danger he poses to the public and to the individuals who have risked everything by coming forward. Many of us have first-hand knowledge of the fear he still instills in those around him. I can say without hesitation that he is a serious and immediate threat to victims, witnesses, and the broader community. His pattern of violence, particularly while engaged in the trafficking of individuals for prostitution, combined with unchecked substance abuse, makes it clear that he is not ready to re-enter society safely or responsively." Interesting. And by the way, just to give everybody a sense, I was curious to see what the government would say in response, considering this wasn't a win for them. They were looking for racketeering. They were looking for at least 1 count of sex trafficking. This is a statement from the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jake Clayton, and Special Agent in charge of the New York Field Office of Homeland Security Investigations, Ricky J. Patel. This is after the verdict. Sex crimes deeply scar victims, and the disturbing reality is that sex crimes are all too present in many aspects of our society. Victims endure gut-wrenching physical and mental abuse, leading to lasting trauma. New Yorkers and all Americans want this scourge stopped, and perpetrators brought to justice. Prosecuting sex crimes requires brave victims to come forward and tell their harrowing stories. We and our law enforcement partners recognize the hardships victims endure and have prioritized a victim-centered approach to investigating and prosecuting these cases. And they go on to thank a bunch of different partners and that were part of this case. But yeah, nothing really per se about the verdict. It was a very fascinating day. You did terrific, excellent reporting during the course of this entire case. Elizabeth, thank you so much. I know the viewers and the listeners, thank you so much. I'm going to miss doing these recaps with you. But let's see what happens at sentencing, cause that certainly will be interesting to say the least. Elizabeth Milner, thank you so much. Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Jesse. I always appreciate you so much. Alright, everybody. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time. Music.